my life got flipped, turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I became the prince of a town called Bel Air.
Good evening and welcome to the Kuhn Academy for this installment of AP US History, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. Okay, so we're going to talk to you a little bit about some stuff we didn't get done in class today, which is William Penn and the Holy Experiment, as well as the founding of the Carolinas. All right. We're all obviously familiar with William Penn from the founding of Pennsylvania, but we want to get into a little more about how that actually came about. All right. Okay, so as you look at the map here, we just want to kind of look at the settlement of the early English colonies as far as who was there. You'll notice New York, settled by the Dutch, kind of was a nice dividing there between the New England and the rest of your colonies right here. Okay, Carolinas, obviously English settlement down here near the Spanish settlement, and then Pennsylvania up here, right up there against the New York and the Dutch. Okay, you can actually see Philadelphia in the Dutch segment right there. All right. Sorry, I got some technical difficulties here. Okay, so founding Carolina, all right, the both North and South Carolina kind of won at first, and then they split up a little bit later. But basically, Charles II, all right, these are called the Restoration Colonies, wanted to reward the 8 nobles that helped him gain the throne during the English Revolution there in 1660. Okay, so they established North and South Carolina to be royal colonies to sort of spread the crown and basically reestablish themselves as an empire. And South Carolina was meant to be rice growing, bringing those people from Barbados that we talked about up from the Sugar Isles and the United Kingdom, people trying to create a new cash crop and make some more money that way. North Carolina was meant to be self-sufficient tobacco farms because they had such poor transportation. If you know anything about the Carolina coast, it's called the graveyard of the Atlantic for a reason, because there are so many shipping accidents there. So they basically wanted tobacco farmers that could just become self-sufficient, grow their own food, and export just a little tobacco and survive. So it's a much poorer area. We talked about the barbecue sauce thing, which kind of is true and is kind of legend. But they're going to be less reliant upon slavery. And that's key to remember much later on, because when the Civil War is going to happen, they're going to be one of the last states to secede because they have so much less reliance on slavery than Virginia to the north and South Carolina to the south. Okay. Now this is a home in South Carolina. I just want to point this out real quick. You'll notice the front door. Okay, I'm on the street here taking the picture. The front door is over here. And you might say, well, that's not the front door, Kuhn, that's the side door. Well, there were no front doors in South Carolina. This is Charleston, the capital, the colonial capital, because the front of the building faced the road, and to get better ventilation, the houses were built long and narrow. You can kind of see like this, which totally was from the Caribbean model in Barbados, which is where these people had originally settled and then moved north to Carolina. So you see a lot of Caribbean influence in South Carolina, with the front door being on the side, actually. There's a little wives' tale that they tell in Charleston about taxing purposes, but that's not true. It's really just because this is the Caribbean style of architecture, with a front door on the side for better ventilation, being in the brutal heat down there. Okay, now South Carolina is very known for their aristocracy, and very controversial for that, because by 1770, when the revolution is about to happen, the richest 10% own half the wealth in the colony. So that's a very huge income disparity in South Carolina, making these sort of the wealthiest people in all the colonies. And then obviously there's a lot of poverty. If 10% own half the wealth, the 25 poorest percent own only 2% of the wealth. So huge income discrepancy, and we can really call the Carolinas or South Carolina an aristocracy or an oligarchy, where the few are the rulers. Okay. Now, as far as the global competition, expansion of England's empire, this is what's going to lead to this holy experiment in Philadelphia, okay, which is going to be the Quaker settlement and the development of the Pennsylvania countryside. Okay, and Foner talks about Quaker liberty and kind of their definition being far different than others. All right. Now, William Penn, his dad was a admiral in the British Navy and was victorious, so the king owed him a rather large sum of money. So he decided to give his son William some land in the Americas. All right. So this was a proprietary colony, letting William Penn establish this for himself and ability to make a profit. All right. So we see an early engraving here of Mr. Penn arriving on the ports of Philadelphia. You see the religious figure on the top, even looks like a witch up there. But this is kind of the king's blessing as the colony is founded there. All right, William Penn had 3 goals. All right, he wanted to create a refuge for Quakers, just like Maryland was a refuge for Catholics. Pennsylvania was going to be a refuge for Quakers and other persecuted religions. We kind of wanted this to be similar to Rhode Island. He wanted to sort of establish some very new ideas in government. Remember, this is in the height of the Enlightenment. So he wanted a representative assembly elected by landowners. All right, so this is where we see the idea of a republic, okay, government, not a democracy where the people rule, like what was going on up in Massachusetts where they had these town meetings. But in Pennsylvania, you were going to have an assembly where you elect someone and then they make decisions for you. He obviously wanted freedom of worship, similar to our First Amendment, and unrestricted immigration. William Penn felt that we should be able to allow anyone to come to the colony that was going to generate more money and things like that. And then his third goal was to obviously generate income and profits for himself. So the more people hopefully meant more income for William Penn. All right. Other thing he did that's significant is he brought a plan for a grid of streets, which was later imitated by most cities. You'll notice most cities, the streets go north and south like so, and east and west like this, kind of in a grid pattern. And then Penn also wanted to treat the Native Americans fairly and not cheat them out of land. All right, so he's very similar to Roger Williams. These are two great people to talk about when you talk about colonial dissenters and having different ideas there. Here's the grid plan for Philadelphia, a city of brotherly love. All right, so you'll notice the grid with street blocks and things like that. Where if you go to like a Boston, the streets wind all over the place and are very odd shaped. All right, and here you see William Penn being very generous with the Indians, cutting a treaty there. They're very respectful of him. See here one being nursed back to health. Okay, here's one Indian looking on kind of suspiciously there. All right, this is all just a painting, so it's kind of some secondary source work there. All right, and then you'll see sort of how some of the developments start to happen. So when we look in Philadelphia, we see a total melting pot. Okay, we see some Scotch-Irish in the back country here. We see a lot of Germans. In fact, they still call this area Pennsylvania Dutch country. That's where a lot of Kuhns come from. Not Kuhn, of course, but Kuhns. All right, and then the English mostly along the coast like we'd seen before. All right, Quakers were known as the Religious Society of Friends, friends being the key word there. They believed in a true sense of equality for men and women. All right, they were a nonviolent group. They still are today. In fact, if you're a Quaker today, you don't have to be registered for the draft because you are a pacifist. So they resisted military service, felt that wasn't the proper way to deal with your problems, and that religious authority was found within your soul, not from an outside source. So you didn't have to, they still worship God and things like that, but you didn't need that minister, religious leaders preaching that for you. And here's a Quaker meeting. You'll notice where they're sitting. They're not sitting by families. You see the men over here. You see the women over here. Okay, so that true sense of equality that they sit side by side as opposed to some Puritan services where the men would be in the front and the women to the back. All right, so thank you for listening to this installment of the Kuhn Academy, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. And for those of you too young to remember, the song has a little something to do with, listen here carefully.
In West Philadelphia, born and raised on the playground is where I spent most of my days.